If your team isn't aware of what it is they're contributing to in the end, other than a bunch of tasks, and why they're doing it, irrespective of OKRs or not, that's not great. So people that are leading teams should always give context to what that team's driving overall and what it means to the business so that they feel valued. Hello, welcome to Cloud Unplugged. I'm Jon Shanks.
And I'm Jay Keshur.
We're going to be talking about teams and talent, measurements and kind of KPIs and OKRs and all those things.
Basically, how to get the best out of your teams, right? Because what we've obviously what we've been talking about so far is just really about technology and organization and the challenges there. But on a kind of human level, there's a bunch of people that are now managers, and they have people to manage.
Yeah.
And obviously, Jon and I, we've been doing this for a little while. There's lots of challenges and learnings that
we also have to do this. You know, it's a challenge in itself because we've got a company of our own.
Yeah.
And so we understand how it's not easy and
it's not a solved problem. We definitely haven't solved it either, but we're just here to kind of talk about some of our learnings.
Yeah. So do you want to start? Because this is more in your...
I'm gonna go maybe with a bit of a story of what we've learned, I guess, and then how that kind of could relate to the things that normal companies do, right?
As a company as a whole, or more for like engineering teams? I guess it's probably more engineering teams be more
a little bit of both.
Otherwise, it could be a little bit.
I'm going to do a little bit of both.
Broad, too broad for the Cloud Unplugged.
I guess there's like now industry terms, and Google, helped in this by helping to create OKRs. Intel, I think, were the ones to do it.
Yeah, it was John Doerr that
John exactly. John Doerr. It's spelled Doerr, isn't it?
I mean, yeah.
Doer. Anyway, so
kind of an ironic.
Yeah.
Name,
Yeah. It's definitely a doer, not a measurer.
Yeah.
No. So in Intel, Google, etc. There's this whole framework called objectives and key results, and we've been on a bit of a journey, obviously, trying to kind of implement this in our own business and in the teams that we've worked in, right? So starting way back when. So should we just kind of frame up what OKRs are, what it means, what they're supposed to do first, and then kind of talk about the ways of potentially doing that in a business to get the right outcome. So OKRs, objectives and key results, really are there to kind of get an organization or a team to align in direction, having a mission or a North Star, a vision statement of what you're all there to do inside that business, or inside at an organizational level, or even at a team level, and then the things that you're going to drive as objectives, and then the key results, which is the way to check that you're making progress against an objective, and then you'll have sort of initiatives under those key results to move the needle, if you will. So let me give you a bit of an example. So let's say the objective was to improve customer satisfaction overall. So a key result of that might be like an NPS score or a CSAT score. An NPS is Net Promoter Score, so like a survey that a customer does. And one of the things that this whole process does is it makes you really think about the data that you have, the data that you're collecting, and how that tracks over time, right? So let's say you're setting an objective that you want to do this in a quarter, half a year, whatever it is, and the key result is that you get from 30 to 40 as a score. So then you're going to have a bunch of initiatives to try and drive that. You might do things like one, actually, you need to know that you're measuring it. Two, you need to check that you're continuously measuring it so that you can obviously have know what the result is. 3, you need to figure out what you're going to actually do under that. So that might be improving your response times or something like that. You're changing the language that you're using when you're talking to the customer, trying to be really diligent in how you're solving it in a slightly different way, or even the people that you put onto that customer. So I guess that's an example of objectives and key results. I guess what this could mean to a sort of platform team, cloud, to sort of bring it back a little bit. Like, as a cloud platform team, you're there, and your customer really is the developer, right? The developers that are creating business logic for the organization. So if you're trying to measure how successful your team is, how can you do that? Like, what
are you just stopping there?
Yeah, no. I'm just, I guess, trying to think.
So I guess it was the first thing around objectives. It's normally anchored in some business goal, right? Yeah. So there's got to be a rationale of what isn't happening, maybe that they want to happen. I guess it depends on the context of what's gone on. So it might be that they're like, it's not an uncommon thing to want to be a leader within their own space, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like they're in their own market and they're thinking, right, well, we want to be way more innovative, right? Innovative, yeah. And that means we want to maybe be a leader, or the third leader, or the top 5, companies of X, or whatever it is that their ambitions are.
Yeah.
Or it could be revenue based. Mm-hmm. Or whatever it's going to be, operational costs or anything. So depending on whatever it is you're striving for, sets the parameters really of what you're going to then try and do. Mm-hmm. Because you then need to work out, well, how is my team attaching to that goal? So if it's to do with innovation, then how do I enable innovation? If it's to do with reduction of operating costs, how do I optimize the team to be more efficient? And what does efficient mean right now, or what does innovation mean right now? Well, how long did it take for somebody to recognize a service that we would have deemed, I don't know, it could be ML or AI or something that might be deemed
hard to use or insecure or something like that.
Exactly, or something that was going to be an enabler to drive an innovative outcome. And actually the time for them to get it was 5 months.
Yeah.
And therefore, actually at the moment,
opportunity cost.
Yeah, exactly. So that for the business, they're never going to be seen as innovative if it takes 5 months to even get some technology up and running that could make you look innovative.
Depends who you are. Maybe that's the quickest thing that they've ever done, right? Like, imagine that there's like an archaic organization that like hardly changes or whatever, and that's currently
let's not
years.
Say that 5 months is ever good.
Exactly. That's awful. I'm saying that in certain scenarios, I'm guessing that that could be considered quick. Hopefully, you're not in one of those companies. But yeah,
but you're not going to be the leader.
No, of
right.
course.
So I guess the goal contextually. So so then you've got to work out. Well, our objective is to provide innovative services to the developers within a month of the request or something, right? And that's it. So that's how it becomes an objective. And then it's like, well, what are our exact results? Well, how long does it take? Maybe there's a ticketing system, right? So it's like, right, okay, there's a ticketing system into the team for a service. What's the time at the moment for that service? Like, why is it taken 5? Oh, there's a security review. There's a board. There's a thing, right? And you start to look at the process and you're like, okay, so at the moment, our current time is this based on this process. And then you've measured each bit of the process.
Yeah.
What can we do to shrink elements of that down to say our result is going to be to get it from A to B?
Well, no, it's more so.
That'll be the key result.
Yeah, exactly. That's one key result.
Yeah, I'm not saying that's where you stop.
Yeah.
And then you're finished. And you are a leader.
That's it. You're innovative.
You're innovative.
Tick.
You have succeeded on the ambition of the company, and the company is successful. I mean, what else is there to talk about?
End of conversation. Great. Hope this was useful for you guys.
I'm just giving an example, like contextually for the team, and so that would be like one result that you could then anchor in, and then you're into initiatives of that one result, maybe first, because you might like break that down, and then you could do another one, which is how fast does it take them to deploy to a thing. How long is it? So you'd find all the right things attached to that to then go and measure to meet the objective, or you might have several smaller objectives of the bigger objective.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
And then have 3 to 5 key results of each smaller objective, with a few objectives for the team. So yeah.
Yeah. So just to kind of break that down, like the common sort of patterns that people use across sort of businesses is maybe having an objective for, say, the year or the financial year or whatever, and then trying to break that down into kind of objectives that they could do that quarter, or that they have that quarter, and then key results, which are signals that they're going to hit that objective within that time frame, and then all of the initiatives that they'll have to put under those things. So I guess,
although controversially, I need to check my facts. But, I think in some places they set stretch. They're always a stretch.
Yeah.
So they always say if you've managed to meet them, it wasn't ambitious enough.
Yeah. That's right.
So you're
supposed to hit.
You're
like
supposed to hit
80% or something. Yeah.
But to hit 100% meant that you didn't push hard enough,
which is good, right? Like it's a learning process. Theory. I think it's a learning process even when you're doing this in your own organization, because like just because you've done, you know, some of the theory or you've done it all before doesn't mean that the goals that you're setting are correct, or the key result, the way that you're measuring is correct. And then you've got all of the people that you're working with to get this outcome for the business.
Yeah.
So maybe not everyone is bought into doing this in the same way or whatever. So
it does take a different mindset, because the frustration thing for some people is that they feel they already know what needs to be done, right? Because they can see the problems and they can see what's going on, and they've got to retrofit the answer back into some OKRs.
Framework.
Yeah, and they're like, but we know we need to do this stuff. And it's like, yeah, but it isn't in an OKR. So, you know. And it could feel like slower. Because like, well, I would have done that stuff anyway. Yeah, it's just process, and I would have done that stuff anyway.
Yeah.
And like, did it make much difference? Other than the fact that the business could fit it into something that was more aligned to other areas. And it's like, you know, so it does, that's I think the downside of people.
But the flip side of that is it also anchors in your, you know, the priorities that company or the team has, right? So let's say those things that they kind of needed to do anyway, maybe you wouldn't do them if they're not directly attributed to what you as an organization have all like signed up to do, and the importance of that. Then who knows? Maybe it's just not worth doing. Yeah. Unless, you know, like, I mean, I guess there's lots of different ways to skin the cat here, but like, let's say you had an objective to, I don't know, get more revenue or something like that. But you might also have an objective to like keep the revenue that you have. And that's like, you know, customer satisfaction, or could be like something to do with reliability of the services. So if you say had an engineer had some task of making sure that their service or something like that was highly available, let's say, and they didn't have that objective that covered customer retention and satisfaction, then they might not prioritize making that highly available. So there's often like how all of these objectives kind of fit together really makes a difference. So you're keeping your eye off the ball. But I think it can bring a really focused way of dealing with this. However, I'm going to be a bit controversial here. You hear of the big kind of organizations doing OKRs, or these like stories of, you know, these orgs and stuff doing it. It takes a lot, right? It takes a lot to get people to think in this way, to have that process. Like there's like obviously evidence that it can be really good, but there's probably lots of different ways of getting a team to the right outcome. You know, making sure that you have a really high kind of working collaborative team that is well poised, well positioned to, in a good situation, to create to get the outcome for the business across whatever discipline.
I think though it's a funny one because OKRs, because they're prescriptive and prescribed.
Prescriptive and prescribed. Oh shit.
Yeah,
Okay.
they're prescribed
Wow.
because they're prescribed to a team, as in there's a framework, right? Then the resistance is that they've got to work out now this prescribed way of thinking and how to structure, right? They're doing. The reverse of it is like OKRs is a way to measure something in a kind of framework, but irrespective of whether you had OKRs or not, teams should know that what they're doing is contributing to the business. So if you just say, right, at the end of all this stuff you've done,
What happened?
Yeah, what happened?
Yeah.
Right. What
you
did you
measuring?
move? What needle did you move?
Also, how are you measuring your success?
Yeah. What is
Right.
it? Yeah. How do you know what you've done was actually helpful for
Yeah.
the company? How do you know what you've done? And if you can't really fully know, and you're like, well, because I was just told to do it, or like, it's like, well, that's not great, because then you don't really know what value you're bringing if you don't attach to it. So the flip side for managers is, well, if your team isn't aware of what it is they're contributing to in the end, other than a bunch of tasks,
And why they're doing it.
and why
yeah.
they're doing
Yeah.
it, irrespective of OKRs or not,
Yeah.
that's not great.
Yeah.
So people that are leading teams should always give context to what that team's driving overall,
And what
so
it
that
means
it's-
to the business.
and what it means to the business, so that they feel valued.
Exactly.
So-
Well, they just know that they're adding to the business, right? They're
exactly.
not just like an operational cog or whatever.
Exactly.
They can directly link what they're doing to the business. In fact, I think even in the book there was like a story of how in Intel, you could ask anyone in the business, even like a cleaner in a toilet or whatever, like what function do you play in the business, or what are the goals of the business, and they'll know because or they'll trace all the way up through their objectives, the goals, etc., all the way to the main business objective and their function within it, which is quite cool, right?
Yeah.
That alignment, that vision, it sounds really, a nice
So
feeling of togetherness or whatever.
I mean, people get a bit hung up on it and all a bit defensive when you mention OKRs. Sometimes
because it's process.
Because it's process, and it's like it's a structure to force a way of thinking and behaving, which not many people really like, right? Because people have their own styles and ways of thinking. But at the end of the day, the company has an objective, and people are employed by a company, and you need to feel that you are bringing value, to a business, and obviously that gives you job satisfaction when you are.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's one dimensional. It's not like, oh well, it's the only way a business succeeds is by doing it. It's like, no, you also need it the other way, because I don't really know why I'm doing half of the things, and that's not very satisfying to me, and I can't tell if I'm bringing value or not, or then I don't have great job satisfaction. So it is necessary, whatever it is you do use, whether it's OKRs or not. Maybe there's some other ways of doing it that aren't just OKRs, but it's important. Otherwise, how does anybody get job satisfaction?
But I guess there's lots of other kind of things in the industry around, working towards an outcome, and like scaled agile as an example, right? Like that's like very different in how it works and stuff, or just in general agile for a team, right? It's like not necessarily prescriptive way of working, but it's a framework. Like pick and choose what makes sense for that way of working, and it's a lot more about moving autonomy into those areas, having defined structures of working, acceptance criteria, all of this stuff.
But I think that's important, because OKRs on their own won't work.
Yeah.
Because if you're not meeting regularly enough as a team, and you're not trying to work, like you will probably find out that you didn't meet the targets because you weren't also.
You checked in once a quarter.
You've checked in, checked in at the end. Of like,
did
we meet the numbers?
Oh, no. Oh, shit.
No. Never mind.
Yeah.
So obviously all the things have to come together well. Like how you operate overall kind of matters. I think though, from a platform engineering thing, because otherwise it'll be too generic.
Yeah.
I think I still think you can see from an engineering perspective, because it tends to be quite specific to things you're doing. It's usually easier to measure when you are like delivering something, because you've got to do and write something. So there should be, if you're standardizing best practices, there should always be pretty good measurements. If you're testing, there should be things around tests.
Yeah.
If you're releasing, there should be frequency around the releases. if you're security scanning, you should know about how many security issues you've got. If you're tracking bugs, you should also know about the bugs that you've been raised, right? How fast you're delivering them.
Yeah.
So I think all those things start to become trackable things that are about quality or about speed or about something, right? So if you've got users, which you will have downstream, you can interview them, right?
For sure.
How satisfied are they? Is it easy to use? What's the, like you talk about net promoter scores or things like that. So there are definitely things you can always anchor in.
Yeah.
And so I think you start with the measurements.
You start with the measurements, then you have insights, I guess, on those measurements, like why is that thing this? We thought we were going to do this, and that should have moved the needle. Why didn't it? Maybe we need to change the thing that we're doing. Maybe it's not the right metric to move that needle, right? I'll give you an example, like bugs raised. You would think that if the number of bugs raised or something like that went down over time, it was good. It meant that there's quality. However, the opposite could be true. It could be that people just aren't raising bugs because they're no longer using the platform or not testing it or whatever else. So you've got to be really I guess have an understanding of what that data actually means
and not gamify as a team where you're like, oh well,
just don't raise any bugs, guys, it's fine.
Exactly. We'll just not raise any issues or whatever, or we'll just work on it. So I mean, there are obviously always, but they're kind of different problems. There are also things, because I think about platform team, there are some things that you'd expect to be implicit that you might not be an objective of the business, like security. So it might be speed driven.
Yeah.
Right. So you're like, it's going do speed way faster. But actually then you got hacked a month later and you're like, oh, that was a costly thing because you wouldn't put it as an objective necessarily because it wasn't what was important fully to the business. So there are implicit things, that become standards that maybe aren't necessarily like an objective, and it's very multifaceted on.
Oh, totally, because you can't really define like
all of these things,
entire business, how you're going to work together, the skills that you need, all of the things, just in like a line, a sentence, like this is what I want to achieve. Great, thanks, done.
Exactly. So you have to have the frameworks of other things around, like you're saying, like the agile, the standards, the best practices,
things like
DORA metrics, all those things. I think you kind of have to have some element of definition, not all of them, but enough to kind of measure success by and measure like the quality in the end.
Yeah, exactly.
Of what you're kind of producing.
And then like if you're kind of an engineering manager as well, like how you're team morale and things like that, how you're getting the team sort of bought into the vision, how you're kind of making sure that they are upskilling, learning, have an environment to grow in, things like that. That's like super important. But again, it's not necessarily something that we always sort of measure or track,
so then
especially as an objective.
The team topologies then. So if you are talking about platform teams, and now you've got requirements from a business maybe around objectives and key results, what's the makeup of this team? That the skills of what the business needs in terms of like how you're going to measure the frameworks and the standards of which need to be put in place, and then the engineering capability of obviously what might need to be produced. What would the team topology look like if you were to put these frameworks? If you were to really measure these things, then who's doing what in this team of? Because you can't.
That's a good question.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, I guess it feels like there's never a right answer. There's common patterns.
Yeah.
It's not. I'm not trying to cover out this question, but it feels like there's common patterns, right? And that like the book Team Topologies, for example, it talks about some of those patterns. It doesn't necessarily go into the detail of who those people are in those teams, but the sort of concepts within that are like stream alignment. So making sure that you have people that are focused on delivering sort of value streams and being sort of product centric, having sort of expertise that is common across multiple teams, centralized, so that you can have efficiency, and depending on whether you're sort of building that central capability, if you're building something then and it's a product, then maybe it's like
ill-defined to be and not very. I
so?
think when things become very ambiguous, they're just not helpful, because basically it's like saying what you need is people, and those people need to have some skills, and with those skills you need to make sure that somewhere these skills are somewhere, and that you're like, well, yeah, I mean, isn't that just how you're basically just telling how business is already run? I mean, like, people get hired and they have skills, and it's like, great, well, we can't. I assumed everyone knew that bit, but what is it that's going to make the team like to be
what team? What platform teams?
Yeah, the platform team.
Platform teams, right.
If you're saying that there's measurements that are key,
Yeah.
And and I'm being controversial
So a cloud-
on purpose to
I
kind
know,
of pin it
exactly,
down because
yeah.
otherwise things
Cloud
just are left
platform team,
exceptionally ambiguous for everybody. And team topologies, I mean, I haven't read it, so I'll have to give it a read, but I'm sure it must detail something in there because otherwise it would only tell you everything that like it can't. I'm presuming it won't be that ambiguous. I haven't read it, so I can't really give an answer to it. So, but there has to be some concrete things to help you make decisions against, so you can actually like. If we're looking for like an optimum team, it needs to be some. So I'm going to put myself out on the line by just saying you always want someone good at mentoring. Yeah. I think.
Oh right.
Right? So I would say if you don't have a mentorship typed individual in your team,
what about a cross function? So let's say you weren't. What if they weren't in the team, but you had that elsewhere in the organisation?
Well, I would classify it's kind of in the team if it's even. If it's available, then the team's getting it, I guess is kind of what I mean. So it might not be within the team directly as in they're contributing to that team. But
so these are like characteristics that you expect or capabilities then maybe. I don't know.
Well, yeah, but the person would need to be... I'm not sure. I would say it's better if it's in the team.
Okay.
Because you're watching them on a regular basis to probably identify gaps faster. And you also don't have that...
but a mentor is different to a manager.
But true.
Ideally they'd be like great, right? They're the same person.
True,
or whatever,
but growing somebody, which you want ideally,
just pour some water. They just grow. Yeah, exactly. It's fine.
If you're there to grow someone, you're probably there. You'll probably see things that the manager might too. But if you have that style person, then they're a growth-minded individual, and they're all about trying to grow people. Ideally, you'd have that around the person in the team, somebody that's got that natural capability to be perfect. Obviously, I know it's a hard thing to hypothesize, but that means they're going to be picking up on things where they could see things that maybe need improvement, and they're helping them and coaching them while it's there and they're seeing it, rather than getting a list of things a month later because you checked in and there's like a bunch of stuff that happened that maybe got missed, or it's always really high level, big ticket items. I kind of think things can be a bit more nuanced on because a lot of mentoring and growth is habit forming. Yeah. And that means repetition of new things. And like sometimes you can be quite habitual and you've got to break old habits that maybe aren't as good as new ones that you might form. And that is all about repetition and like removing old repetition and forming new repetition. Right. So
momentum, yeah.
Yeah. And that I think is, to do those things, you've got to be doing them often enough. And it's making sure people kind of get the momentum and the repetition going, and then they'll form a new habit.
So a mentor, a manager, something in the team, and then.
I mean, I'm just saying. Random things.
I like it. Yeah, could do it.
I'm just spitballing it though. To be fair, 'cause I haven't really structured an answer because it's more for you to talk to because you've been doing it. But I think leadership qualities obviously are going to be important, and that might be slightly diverse. Some of that might
only just make sure it's only slightly diverse though, right? Like we don't want to go full.
Well, as in the culture will define probably the leadership types.
Yeah, sure.
So not all businesses. So I guess you've got to look at the culture, or you might have to look at what you're changing from want to be. So right. if your culture is at the moment, there's a lot of like if you're risk averse and the culture in the business is to reward risk aversion, because the business feels like you protected them, and you're wanting to break that.
Be more innovative, or whatever. Then
exactly.
You probably want to bring a leader.
Then you want to try and bring somebody in that doesn't reward risk aversion, actually rewards risks being taken. And like so, I guess all these things matter to the dynamic of a team. Yeah. And then sometimes you want really good executors, you want different thinkers. You want creative thinkers in there because you don't want to be leaning on one side where everyone agrees with everything. So you need challenges sometimes.
I think that's kind of where that diversity comes. Like whenever you have diverse teams from different backgrounds, ages, sexes, all of this kind of stuff, right? That's like
you get the best outcome.
It's always the best outcome because there's always like a bunch of things that you as an individual or other people that are like really closely aligned to who you are and have similar backgrounds and all that kind of stuff. To be fair, you'll probably have like you probably think a lot alike. So having that diversity will always, hopefully, get you to the right place.
Perspective, isn't it? It's like it's a slightly different perspective of the same problem.
Yeah.
That helps you see the problem from a different side.
Yeah.
That then helps you as a team come up with the right answer in the end. Because you don't want to lean on a bias too hard, because then you're like, well, we all biased to the same thing because of where we've come from or how we all have the same perspective.
That's it. And also, what we're kind of implying is that there's a high collaborative culture.
Yeah.
So you could have a super diverse and inclusive team, but they are at odds with each other all the time because they can't rationalize and have good processes of working things out and systems to make decisions and things like that. I mean, it sounds like systems to make decisions. Yeah. It sounds more process heavy than it needs to be, but just being collaborative and having sort of understanding how to make decisions effectively, autonomously, that's super important. Yeah. Being able to communicate really simply and high.
Yeah, I think that's very important. Communication. Yeah, I mean, not everybody's. Some people can struggle, obviously, with communication. I think giving investment in people to help improve their communication obviously is always good.
Any tips that you have for improving communication?
I mean, people listen to this podcast today. They're probably like, "This guy surely is not going to have an opinion on communication."
We can improve communication by stopping it.
I'm not sure I am the best.
50% down. That would be an improvement.
Because I do get lots of messages saying, "You're such a good communicator. You must give us some advice." I don't know. I guess I've never formally myself had it, but I think there are lots of ways of. There's loads of companies that will help people, I guess, increase the tactics and abilities of how to communicate and structure things and how to lead from. Maybe sometimes you can lead from an outcome and then walk backwards from that rather than leading from where you are in the weeds and forward. So there's sometimes there are tactics of showing something first, and then going on a journey for it that makes it easier for people to orientate around what you're saying. And that helps people in the communication. But there's loads of you can get people into businesses basically that do this as a living who'll come in and can train on.
There are. I was thinking about doing this myself at really early on, but master classes in sort of public speaking and things like that, right? Or speech giving, because that is commanding an audience and all that kind of stuff. Where it's really, really quite cool to be able to do. I'm on a podcast now, so it's fine. Don't need to do it. So. That's it. Put it now. But public speaking, if you just don't have an audience and you make it digital, an audience of one becomes a lot easier.
But then, so I guess, so if we could have these OKRs and you're going to bring people in, you want innovation. I think you need a dynamic team for innovation, to be honest, right? And I think you want
dynamic and diverse,
dynamic and diverse. And if you're optimizing for speed, you will need a mix of people that know what they're doing, right? Because they've got the experience. You will probably want some highly experienced individuals in there who know what best practice looks like and the standards. And you also want some juniors on there, but then there's got to be a budget allowed for that, because there's got to be some mentoring, training, upskilling that's got to go on. So you can't expect them to be highly effective. And so obviously you're going to want to diversify in the teams there. And then you also need good ceremonies, which is the agile stuff you were talking around all that communication. So you kind of encourage it.
For sure. The collaborative ways of
doing
working.
stand-ups, you've got to speak
process,
right in the team. You've got to say what you just did today, what
100%,
what you're doing yesterday, what you did today, what you blocked on, etc., and that actually forces people to have to communicate in the team on a regular basis, which I think is very, very healthy. Those things.
Yeah, exactly. And over COVID and stuff, there's obviously been, I'm sure a lot of companies and teams have had to sort of figure this out, right? Because when you're not co-located all the time, then maybe some of these things sort of maybe naturally happen. But then to kind of get you to the right outcome in a sort of disparate or disaggregated environment, having stuff like this, agile, would probably just be a natural kind of step into
Yeah.
it, like how to get the best out of a team, and really measure the output of what they're doing and things like that. So
I don't know if there's like a personality profile. This is not really related to this podcast stuff, because I'm more of a people person, less digital worker, as in like I can do tasks digitally.
Less digital worker.
Well, as in like you can do the Zooms and the Meets and all these other things, obviously fine, but it has, then you've got intention. To do that means you've got intention. There is no organic nature to it.
The
at
creativity of like being,
and I'm quite organic in how I am as an individual, and I process through communication freely, as you know, irritatingly. So, and I like to talk things out, and it helps me exercise. And that doesn't lend itself. I mean, I know you can put a meeting in to go and do it, but that means you've got to be intentionally then doing it. And then the other person will probably just like switch the camera off and be like, I'm going to go make a coffee because you're taking, so I don't even know, you're just talking at me at this stage. But
I haven't done that ever. What?
It's really weird. No one has the cameras on. They're always mute.
Exactly.
But yeah, I mean, that remote working to a point has a limitation on it. I've never managed to, especially my role, probably different, but I've never managed to fully make that work for me. I'd be intrigued to know. I'm sure some people are quite good at it, but I just don't like all the intentionality of everything. So harder.
I was speaking to someone recently about remote working and hybrid and all these kind of things, 'cause especially after COVID, it's always a bit of a topic, right? And the way that I think about it is like less as an individual, but more as an organization, right? Let's say another organization in your space, the thing that you're doing, you didn't know anything about their company, but they were all in the same building. They were all working together on the same thing. Do you reckon that would give them, like, would you be worried? Do you think that they would, almost have a better chance of having a competitive advantage because there's better collaboration and communication because they're co-located? Like, logically, you think yes, right? So just because you have, like, I guess that's got to tell you something a little bit. If everyone agrees to those types of things, and every single person that I've spoken to, they always say, yeah, that makes sense. Of course, you'd be worried. Then really for the organization, it's always probably better to some degree. There's lots of other things to take into account, like cost of being distraction, cost, like if you wanted to be sort of hybrid or remote or have sort of offshoring, things like that, you can't always do that. There's lots of other factors to think about. But if you were just trying to create an amazingly collaborative, like high quality speed team, then being co-located is going to be the thing that.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think it lends itself to maybe the really good personality and characteristical traits that work really well remote.
Yeah, probably.
And less certain types of characteristical traits that don't. I feel like I'd be one that wouldn't work really well remotely, just because of my personality type. And I feel like I'm more spontaneous, as in like I could do it, but it'd be harder because you'd probably get ignored, right? Because you're like, they can actually ignore you. Do you know that, Jay? When they're remote.
Maybe I'm going to work from home.
Yeah, they can actually ignore you.
Cool. Excellent.
That's why everyone is in the office from now on. Because you can't just wander over to them and disrupt them.
Wait, talk to me. Exactly.
And people can be busy, but then you're waiting in 10 minutes, and then they'll be like, "Oh, let me just finish this," and they finish the thing, and then they'll be like, "Oh, maybe you can do it at lunch." You're like, "Oh, we'll talk at lunch anyway," and walk and talk and do these things. And I like all of that because then you're collaborating.
But that's not necessarily like saying that it's the best outcome, because to talk
I
take
never
someone
said
out
it
of
was
that.
the best outcome.
Yeah, no, exactly, right. So I'm saying that there's probably lots of measures that we could actually, like, you could just run an experiment. Honestly, you could probably run an experiment to see if like hybrid working or remote working or whatever was like right.
Maybe it just depends on where you are as a business. If things are really well defined, and you've got a very good like modus operandi, right? So it's like you know how to function. Things are clear. you've got product market fit, the execution's there, right? And I think there's clear stories, clear obvious work. Probably remote working is way easier. If there's a lot of ambiguity and you're not quite sure, and it takes a lot of collaboration and a lot of creativity and a lot of rethinking and bouncing off each other to work out.
But maybe you also need like research and things like that, like dedicated time to go off and do the things, right?
Yeah.
And there's lots of ways to kind of create it, but I'm just saying it's just like, it feels like a little bit of
Nothing to do with platform engineering teams.
No, exactly. No, it could, of course, platform engineering teams are.
It's a bit of a stretch to tap it back because we've got to go off.
It's a team that is there to solve a problem for someone, right? And those, like, now the industry is kind of saying, I guess the whole reason that these cloud platform engineering teams exist is like to implicitly like get solutions, build, buy, whatever it is, and solve a problem. But they have to be talking to the customer. They have to be understand what their problems are, researching what's out there, what they can just use, what they have to string together, all of these things. And if they have time and energy and focus to be able to do that in an environment that works well, with all the things that we talked about, like diversity and inclusion, all of the things, then it feels like it's going to be quite custom to the team and their dynamics and their personality types to a certain degree, and their situation and their cost and all of that stuff. But
which is when the hiring, I think, matters, because I think you've got them, as leaders or managers of teams, you want to be always striving for like what complements the team dynamic, right? So what's the thing that might be? Are we weighting too heavily on this side? Are we weighting too heavily on the other side? How do you get the dynamic always right, so that there's really good conversations happening all the time, and that actually the work is, moving quite quickly in the right directions. People are making decisions really well. People are being decisive and testing things quite quickly, and people will feed in and push each other. Yeah, right? And I think when people are like pushing each other and coming up with better ideas or striving to be better, it's a really nice, healthy team at that point. And
being that's a bit competitive. And,
maybe a little bit competitive, but I think more like, just being ambitious on solving the problem well and bringing people up with them, and then pushing each other. And I think that's when you have a really good team.
Growth mindset and things like that you talked about, right? So,
and they can upskill then, because I think then you can look at what it's going to take in that team. We've obviously spoken about loads of cloud. There were loads of cloud courses. When you're talking about cloud platform engineering, SDLC, that's problematic though for somebody to know if they've never been a developer but they're now becoming a platform person. How do you know what a developer needs if you've never done the job? You've never developed, and which you might have done depending on your background, and turned into that. You might have studied it and had to do development work,
but still, like enterprise development, the things that you might have in an organization is going to be very different to maybe what you've learned at school, university or whatever else, right? Or if you've never had that background, you just need to talk to people and like get the users and developers or whatever, have conversations, like work with them. And sometimes people will hire people just to do that, like user researchers and
so does all this factor into your OKRs then? So this team, because when I asked you the question, what's made up of this, what makes up this team to go and deliver well, we've got user research, we go speak to people and all these things. Is that what you're saying as a platform team to be successful, to make sure they're building the right things?
No, because I think because depends on how you're operating and what you're kind of striving for as a business, right? I'm not saying that every single organization should have a platform team and build it themselves and all of that kind of stuff. Maybe there's, maybe you can go for low code solutions and that's all you need to strive for your business.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
Maybe you don't need a platform at all. Maybe there's stuff that exists out there in the world that you could just buy and use.
Yeah, I definitely think that's true for some things, or
definitely.
at least.
Well, it's just
get so far there until the point you do need to hire someone, where you could probably get, like, there's a lot of low code stuff you could probably do.
20% you need to do.
I agree with that now. Technology's moved on quite radically. It doesn't mean though, until the point that you need to worry about the other things.
Yeah, but then the other thing that you said as well, which I found quite good, was the dynamic of the team, and always having a kind of think about, you hire someone, and now there's a cultural shift because you've hired someone, because a person is a part of a team and they bring something to it. Like, how do you get the right culture in that team? Like, now you have to reset and think about what that change means.
Yeah.
The next person you hire is not going to be necessarily the same type of person as the first person you hire. What are you now kind of looking for as skills or qualities or whatever to complement those. So, and then you keep doing that every time you grow the team, until it maybe has a culture, and then lots of kind of things to think about.
Yeah. So the OKRs then, would they map into the team what you're hiring? As in, like, if you needed people to meet that objective, you'd expect a budget to be assigned to also hire to meet that objective. As in, from a business perspective, you'd expect there to be a budget. So I can't meet this objective.
Depends, right? So if it's I guess as managers in most areas, you implicitly have a budget. Your team costs something.
Maybe you don't know. Not every team always has budgets.
Yeah, someone will. Maybe you don't.
Someone will. There'll be money somewhere.
Yeah, there'll be money somewhere that.
But if you need to increase the headcount maybe by X to achieve this objective,
well, you have to ask for it. Like, there's always it doesn't just magically exist in a bank account.
So all the planning then needs to happen within reason.
Yeah.
Before the objectives start, because you need to know what you're aiming for. Otherwise,
unless you've hit your objectives and now you just have a bunch of people just sat around, sort of. There's always something to do. There's always like better operational efficiency to gain. There's like new market opportunities that you might want to get into. There's speed or security risk that you might want to address. So,
but I guess with the platform engineering, because you're saying, like, because people could be like, all right, you've set this objective. We want to be like really innovative and X, Y, Z. And then they're like, we need 15 people to do this, like, of this type, because we need like, and they could come up with a plan, right? They could come up with a plan that's like, we're going to need someone that specializes in networking for cloud. We're going to need someone that specializes in more of the infrastructure side of the cloud. We need, right? And
you're trusting the person that has a plan. Then you're trusting the plan is right.
Do you know what's wrong with my plan?
Yeah. I mean, already that sounds a bit wrong. So
I mean, a little bit facetious, but I suppose the validation then as a team on the plan, like, someone has to, but they might not realize it's so I guess you've got to have the right people in the mix to make sure the objective is right. Because if that team isn't experienced in doing those things, then they might not know what needs to be done necessarily. And so I suppose there needs to be somebody in that's what I'm saying. You need to have someone in with some level of experience. Otherwise, it could be anything. Or research done, I suppose. But even then, it still could be pretty...
I'm going to say some like really top level things.
They're really helpful when
as
you do that.
High level, right?
Yeah. Can you just make it really ambiguous?
It's totally ambiguous.
Is it people, process, and technology?
Operating models. So when there's a team that exists, right? And I think the things that you're talking about is like leading that team, making sure that team has a vision. But then it's also like trusting their ability to do it, and then measuring that they are doing it.
But
right?
how would they know?
And then measuring it against an ROI that you might have on the business.
But the approach to how you've done it could have still got you there.
That's
but
what
the cost
I mean,
of the cost that it took.
That's why it's all of those things. Measuring it, like trusting, like that's a lot of things that you have to think about. So managing, leading, all of those things, they're not easy because of all of the factors, and especially if you need to have like domain and industry experience as well. That's like, it's obviously hard, right? And people skills and all that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not for this podcast because it's about the teams, but even like the State of DevOps report, the platform engineering one, not a stitch was mentioned about money. No mention of money. No mention of money. Just Dora.
They did. Wow.
Yeah.
Incredible.
So if it cost you 50 million to do it, who knows if that was good or bad? Yeah. But we got the metrics, the pretty good metrics. It really didn't contextualize. So it's a bit disappointing because in a business, there needs to be some stitch to the business. You can't just say...
just a little stitch.
Yeah, just one stitch. But you can't... I mean, it's a different podcast. We'll kind of talk about that report because it was good. It was a good report, but just not... It was so abstract from companies and just looking at it from platform engineering as if it was like a siloed thing.
Yeah, right.
Which I found a bit disappointing, but still good. But then a little bit like, who's the audience for? It felt like it was for those personas already, which wasn't necessarily helping them be less siloed.
No, exactly.
But it's still useful.
Anyway,
Sidetrack. Yeah. So anyway, you wrap up for the.
Yeah. So exactly. So look, there's lots of kind of frameworks out there. OKRs, especially in technology, seems to be a really good one that has lots of kind of measures and practices of delivering business value and measuring that against sort of key results and KPIs, etc. Making sure that your team has vision, direction set. You've bought sort of created an inclusive and diverse culture and people, and enabling them to learn and grow as they solve problems. Right. That's like, I guess, some of the sort of key takeaways. But look, we're really obviously interested in hearing your thoughts. If you're a manager of platform teams or want to get into it, then we'd love to hear from you. So like, subscribe, comment, all of the things. You can reach us at hello@cloudunplugged.io.
Yeah, cool.
Great.
Thank you.